a physical thing or a non-physical thing. The atheist refers to the physical thing that is the universe in statement 1, but the argument then switches to statements 4 and 5. Everything that exists was created, God exists, and implies that God is also a physical thing. This implication is false and reduces the whole argument to nonsense. By describing God as physical, it commits a straw man fallacy. It misrepresents God. The atheist persists in alleging that God is physical. The atheist Oxford biologist Richard Dawkins is apparently so naive on this subject that he thinks Michelangelo's painting on the Sistine Chapel is some kind of photograph of God, or that God posed for Michelangelo while he painted. I mean, he acts like God has a body, but this is all straw man misrepresentation. But Dawkins proceeds to act like God has a body and misuses this straw man caricature in this following way. It's a truism that lesser things are always made by greater things. Now, follow me. The honeybee makes the hive and the honeycomb, right? The bird makes a nest. Man makes electron microscopes, computers, and space shuttles. All of these made items are far less complex than the things that made them. Right? You know that. And Dawkins says, surely it must be the same with God. So Dawkins argues in The Blind Watchmaker that in order for God to have created the complex universe, he himself must be more complex than the universe. The lesser is always made by the greater. Well, the lesser was made by the greater, but he's greater in a different way. But Dawkins continues, if, as creationists claim, the universe is too complex to have happened by chance, then God, being even more complex, is even less likely to have happened by chance. So we have these two very complex entities, the universe and God, neither of which should have been able to happen by chance, yet we know at least one of these does exist. So what are we to decide, Dawkins asks. It seems a more reasonable thing to do is to conclude that the more simple of the two is the one that must have happened by chance. That would be the universe. The one item of the two entities that we do all actually see and agree that it does exist. Also, since God was not able to come into existence by virtue of his greater complexity, he could not have existed to have been available to create the universe. And so in this double whammy line of reasoning, Dawkins argues that the universe had to have come into existence by chance, in spite of what we think we know about physical things through science. But the Bible informs us that God is a spirit. Now, being a spirit being myself, I have trouble imagining that. Imagine how God is and how as a spirit he did what he did and does what he does. But not being able to so imagine is a reflection of my limitations. And my considerable limitations do not constitute evidence that he does not exist. But my limitations are not so limited that I cannot realize that there is no contradiction between what we do know about God as a spirit and what we know about the universe as a physical system. And my limitations are also not so limited that I cannot realize that being a spirit, God has no body parts, and therefore has no physical complexity in which these non-existent physical parts are put together. Right? God, unlike the universe, is not physical, and so we have no basis to argue that he had a beginning and therefore needed a cause. Regardless of what we do not know about spirit things, that does not affect what we still do know about physical things. The sum of our empirical knowledge informs us that all physical things had a beginning. But God is not a physical thing. Since God is not physical, we cannot use science knowledge obtained from and about physical things, which do have a beginning, to argue that God had a beginning. Our empirical knowledge and experience does not address or inform us on any aspect of God's existence whatsoever. It only informs us that he must exist in order to be the cause of the physical universe, which our knowledge of physical things informs us did have a beginning and therefore did have to have a cause. So our science can tell us there has to be a God, but can't tell us anything beyond. He must have existed to create. But we have no observation or knowledge, at least none that an atheist and pure naturalist will accept, of non-physical things. Therefore, we do not know that what we know about physical things applies or transfers in any way to any aspect of non-physical things whatsoever. See what they're doing? They're trying to use their knowledge of physical things and say that applies to non-physical things. They have no knowledge of that. Though this leaves us in a position of great unknowns, there's at least no violation of scientific principles or of logic in saying God is the uncaused cause of the physical universe. Therefore, it is not arbitrary to say the universe had a cause, but God did not have a cause. It's a red herring fallacy. Red herring fallacy. This fallacy is committed when someone introduces irrelevant material to the issue being discussed, so that everyone's attention is diverted away from the point being made and towards a different and invalid conclusion. To ask, now see, they say, if God created the universe, who created God? To ask who created God in context of the universe having to have been created is to ask a totally irrelevant question. A red herring. It is the same irrelevant question that someone might ask you after you told him that your automobile was made not by purely natural forces acting in purely natural ways upon purely natural materials, but by someone in a factory. And he demanded in defiance, "Oh yeah, what's his name?" That's kind of stupid, isn't it? What's happening up here? If God created the universe, who created God? It's the same thing. The demand for that person's name as a prerequisite to accepting your statement that a person made your automobile is irrational. Reasonable people know that such a question about the person who made the vehicle is totally beside the point, that the vehicle nevertheless was made by a person. Whether or not you can